Hey there. I'm a long-time Magic the Gathering player, and I'm getting into my nation's competitive format of 7-point Highlander. It's going to be a journey, so I'm documenting my metagame, deck building, and gameplay decisions so that I can improve and become a better player. I've got my dice, I've got my tokens, and I've got my passion, so I should be ready for anything. Right, a deck! So I'll need to have something to actually play, and I've got a few factors to consider. First is familiarity. Since my first event is in less than a week, I need to know what I'm actually doing when I rock up at the event. Second is going to be proactivity. I got some advice a while back that it's easier to learn a format playing a proactive deck, since you can focus more on what you're doing and worry less about what your opponent might do. And third is going to be accessibility. I'm expecting this to be the tightest constraint because I need to actually own the cards that I'm playing, and I'm not operating on a huge budget. I also have a list of decks that I've already played and enjoy, but I'm starting to notice a few issues. Lands is my most played 7-point deck, but the best builds require 6 Alpha Duels and a Tabernacle at Pendrell Vale, which is pretty far out of my price range. It's a similar story with Tolarian Academy and Alluran combo decks. I've played a bit of Reanimator and Graveyard combo decks like Tin Fins, but I'm expecting to run into both sideboard hate for the Graveyard and Delver and Tempo decks, both of which are pretty bad news for those strategies. It's fine. We can recover from this. Let's take a look at some of the archetypes that I enjoy instead of specific deck lists. Okay, it's doomed. What do I even have assembled right now? Martyr Proc? That deck doesn't even win. I can't just hope for people to tilt concede. Well, maybe. I actually do have a deck together right now for Canadian Highlander, and it's one that I'm pretty familiar with and I really enjoy playing. Mardu Pyromancer. This is a mid-range deck that uses young Pyromancer and her friends to grind out wins alongside heavy interaction, and it's not ideal. It's a very reactive 3-color deck without blue, which means that I won't have counterspells for any combos that take me by surprise. But it does also have some things going for it. Firstly, it's got no reserve list cards, which means I get an extra point. It's also got a much better proactive game plan than a typical control deck, and it doesn't have blue, so I won't be mistiming my counterspells against surprise combos. I threw together a list in an overnight haze, and here it is. Every time I build a 7-point list, I'm reminded just how much tighter 60-card decks have to be. And the more that I look at this in the light of day, the less satisfied I am with it. Let's go over some points. Firstly, there are probably too many creatures in here. It's bizarre to say as a Highlander player, but Palace Jailer might not justify its place in the main deck. There's also the Stoneforge Cauldron combo, which is 2 deck slots that can be taken out by 1 removal spell. But it is a really big payoff, and there are other reasons that I think justify including it. Then there's also the mana base, which is really painful. I rely a lot on early plays, particularly turns 1, 2, 3. So in the pip deck, a deck with this many pips, in a deck with this many pips, I wind up spending a lot of my life on fetches and shocks. I actually cut Thoughtseize for this reason, and I don't expect to be drawing a huge number of cards off Cling to Dust. We've got some upsides though. The interaction, as expected, is phenomenal, and I'm especially happy with the hand attack. I can reliably have it by turn 2, which is crucial for matchups like Fast Combo, which can put on a lot of pressure but don't play to the board. It's also useful against decks like Hard Control, which are my other worst matchups generally. Then there's the Tutor packages, which made building the sideboard really interesting. Because I have both Urza's Saga and Stoneforge Mystic in the main deck, I actually get access to quite a few more sideboard slots, given that I've got pieces in my main deck which can already access the new cards that I bring in. I'll test this build for a bit and then come back with some notes. I don't expect to change the general framework, but I am concerned that I haven't put enough effort into the sideboard. Alright, so it's been a couple of days. Not since I said that was like a minute ago, but like, I got a script. It was like, since I wrote it. Anyway, I've tested a bit and I've made a few changes. First of all, I moved PJ to the sideboard. He's just too slow for the main, but he'll come in clutch in grindier matchups like many color mid-range and control decks. I also cut Strip Mine for Ghost Quarter, so I could save the point and spend that on Skull Clamp instead. That card can draw me a lot, and it'll be really nice as a bonus Stoneforge payoff if I don't expect it to live long enough to stick Cauldron. Lastly, I cut Silent Clearing for Concealed Courtyard. I just wanted to save every point of life I can since I'm regularly taking between 2 and 4 damage from my mana base. The sideboard is where the big changes happened. I cut a bunch of the redundant removal and Soul Guide Lantern since I can tutor for my Graveyard Hate post-board, and I put in Palace Jailer and Custody Lich to complete my anti-mid-range, anti-control package. I also added Thalia, Thorn of Amethyst, and Calamity's Wake, since even with my hand attack, I really don't trust my matchup against Storm and Storm-type decks. I also really wish I had a Shadow Spear, but Dissection Tools will have to fill that slot for now. The sideboard is what I expect to change the most week to week, since I'll be getting a better understanding of what my matchups are actually like, and which matchups I can expect to face. I'll also be keeping an eye on my removal, since I realize that most of it is actually conditional, so if I keep getting blanked by a Murktide Regent, I might cut something like Grim Lavamancer and add another Doomblade effect. But that's all I can do with the deck for now, so only one thing left. Gotta go play. Okay, so it's the morning of the weekly, and last night YouTube showed me this podcast with like 3 views called the 7 Point Podcast. And it's only got 2 episodes, but it's already showed me something that I wasn't going to be prepared for. And that's Goyfs. See, especially since MH3, there are a bunch of threats running around in top decks which aren't susceptible to removal for small creatures like Lightning Bolt, and can even outpace things like Unholy Heat in the late game. Between the Goyfs, Abhorrent Oculus, and Murktide Regent, I really need to change up my removal. I ended up cutting Grim Lavamancer for Shoot the Sheriff. See, I like having cards in my own graveyard for things like Darcy and Cling to Dust, and plinking away at them 2 at a time is not really going to make the biggest difference to an Angry Barrow-Goyf. I've also decided to keep an eye out for things like Path to Exile, Go for the Throat, and even Gurmag Angler to delve away large parts of my graveyard at once, and see how they could be valuable for me moving forward. But now that's out of the way, we're actually set to go. Well, they say you learn more losing, and I went straight down the 1-3 education bracket. To be honest, it's better than I was expecting, especially with a 4 and 6 game score, including a 2-0 win over what I've now learned is a top tier deck. The most important thing is how cool my opponents were, and they were so helpful for me. I was able to learn a lot about what the format is like and my own gameplay. Here's the rundown. Round 1, I was paired against an aggressive 4-color mid-range deck with great value 3 and 4-drop creatures. A deck that I would have called 4-color blood in Canadian Highlander. And definitely our first game was bloody. It took me half an hour to push out a win, especially through the Throne of the Dead 3 that they got from an initiative that maybe I gave to them and couldn't recover in time. But after that win, I'd mulliganed to 5 in games 2 and 3, never hit my last lands, and eventually lost out. Round 2, I faced the only deck I actually knew about going into the event, Grixis Green. This should be a good matchup for me, but my opponent played very well, taking it slowly and keeping the card advantage over me. I really struggled to gain board presence through their interaction, and eventually got choked out of Game 1. Game 2, I followed up with some really egregious misplays, which, despite my opponent definitely being a stronger player with a probably stronger deck, shut me out of any chance of recovering the game. On my opponent's turn 2, they cast a Ledger Shredder and immediately followed it up with a Mishra's Bauble, drawing, discarding, and putting a counter on it. Then they pass to me, I untap, and draw my own Mishra's Bauble. Instinctively, I cast it first, and then follow up by evoking Fury to deal 4 damage to the Ledger Shredder. But this is my second spell in the turn, and it triggers their Connive ability again, allowing them to draw the card I just saw, discard it, and put a counter on the Shredder, having it survive the damage. Now I follow this up with a Collective Brutality, escalated so I can finish off the Shredder and attack their hand. But now they've cleared the information from the top of their deck. So if I'd gone in the other order, with the Bauble last, I would have killed the Shredder, seen their hand, and then seen the top card of their deck. Whereas now, I've seen the top card of their deck, they've cleared it away, and then I've seen their hand. So the entire sequence is misordered, and it's one of the worst plays I think I've made this year. Later in the game, my opponent had a Dorothy Voidwalker, a Deathrite Shaman, and a Pyrogoyf. I had in my hand a White Plume Adventurer and a Swords to Plowshares. I chose to cast the Adventurer and Swords the Goyf, in the hopes that not having to chump block would give me an option to race. Unfortunately, what happened is that my opponent now had an unblockable creature to take the initiative whenever they want, and they could cut me off from my graveyard resources for the rest of the game. I wound up losing and not drawing another removal spell, and I think in hindsight what I would have done is kill the Voidwalker, chump block the Goyf with the Adventurer, and then hope to scry into something off of the initiative. I'll definitely be thinking about this game when I have to make difficult decisions about the board in the future. My round 3 opponent was on a 4-colour Ketramose Time Walk deck. They flooded out in game 1 with Dorks and lands, and in game 2 I was able to execute my game plan of resolving a key threat, crushing the board, and top decking that interaction for the last few points of damage. Now, even though I saw the least of their deck out of all the decks I played last night, it was probably the most that I learned about the format. See, my opponent is a long-time player with experience using Mardu as a counter to Grixis mid-range decks, and he talked to me about what other people are playing in their lists and how the format actually looks at the moment. He also showed me this Moxfield account, which has all of the decks from major tournaments, and talked to me about what decks I might like to play and how I might like to change up my own list. They actually sent me some lists this morning based on the chat we had and gave me some tips on what I could do to change my list for next week. This really made my evening, and it gave me so much encouragement to keep investing in this awesome format. My final opponent was a bit of a wild card, playing this blue-black flash deck. Game 1 was back and forth right up until they resolved a Sauron's Ransom in my end step. I saw 3 cards I didn't care about, and back to basics. I tried to hide it by giving them 2 and 2, but they decided to be brave, and it was a shutout from there. Game 2 was a similar blowout, since I kept a hand with Skullclamp, drew Stoneforge Mystic, cast it, got Kuldra. I stuck the Kuldra on turn 3, and while they tried to get cute with Tishana's Tidebinder, it ultimately wasn't enough to stop me from closing out the game. Game 3, I kept a risky hand with 2 lands, and despite me drawing both Hymn to Turak and Gerard's Verdict, they were able to consistently counter everything I played and shut me out of the game. All in all, I had a great time. Again, all my opponents were awesome people and happily shared their experience with me. I almost couldn't sleep when I got home thinking about all the potential in this format. Now, as for the particulars of what I learned, it was good to know that I got some things right. There was plenty of blue, and 3 of my opponents were on 4-colour mid-range decks, all of them playing Nethergoyf and Barrogoyf, and most of them playing Pyrogoyf too. Despite that, I was really successful when my opponents played to the board. My most ruthless defeats were against Grixis and Jorgo, and I really had game against that Blood deck in round 1. There was also lots of graveyard hate. The Ketramose player had a Lion Sash and Scavenging Ooze in the main deck, and the Blood player had a Lion Sash in the sideboard with a Stoneforge Mystic to fetch it in the main, just like me. I can see why too. Graveyards fill fast, and everybody was playing these threats which rely on the graveyard to be big. I also got a few things wrong. Combo was absent, and to my understanding it's pretty bad right now, outside of a handful of Underworld Breach decks. Tempo tends to beat combo and lose to mid-range, so their absence was unsurprising. The format was in some ways faster and some ways slower than I expected, and in most of my games, the big moment where someone took control was on game 3. Usually that wasn't me, because my biggest threats actually need me to follow up with an extra spell. My hand attack suite was solid, but not enough against decks which played off the board, and because I cut so many threats for interaction, I wasn't able to form a meaningful presence. Palace Jailer would have been incredible in the main, and I boarded it in every single match. My round 3 opponent agreed it should have been in the main deck, although I could probably leave my Custody Lich at home next time. Biggest thing I learned though was this: I shouldn't bring Mardu next week. It's not that the deck was bad or that I didn't enjoy playing it, but there are so many issues with the deck that I'm not able to learn about the format. See, the mana was a problem, the number of threats was a problem, the type of threats was a problem, how I played the board was a problem. There's just so much going in that makes it complicated to play on my side. I can't even start to think about what my opponent's doing. I will come back to it. I enjoy the deck and I think it is actually good in the meta. But for now, there's something else I've spotted that might be a bit more my speed. Anyway, that's all for now. So until next time, good luck, have fun, and may the best wizard win.